I just hit my 2-year anniversary, and some of you I'm just meeting for the first time. So you're not being truthful that you're over 60. I want to see more of you here, and I did meet a couple people, Mary and Sandy, today that were able to admit they were over 60 and became members. So there is a little membership card. We hope you all checked in today because we do an annual report, and we want to make sure we get our numbers right that you came to visit us. And even people under 60 get credit for being here. So thank you for coming and enjoy the talk. I know it'll be wonderful. Oh, 2 things. I was asked to, a week from today, we're having an intergenerational walk. We had one last year. We'd like you to sign up. It's a 9:30 registration here, and we walk a mile, and it's free. It's just for fun and socialization and getting together and doing a little bit of healthy fitness. There's also a wine tasting for anybody who wants to go up on the ridge, Glendale Ridge. I've heard it's one of the #1 scenic views in our area. So if you haven't been to the ridge, you want to come on October 17th at 3 o'clock, $15. It's a fundraiser for the Friends of the Senior Center. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and thank you for hosting this today. Sure. It's really nice to be able to be here indoors and at the Senior Center. Some people may not have had a chance to come here. So let's get the program going. I'm Chris Fowles, and I'm one of the members of the Southampton Historical Society, trying to help organize and celebrate Southampton events. Having grown up in town, I'm very familiar with what used to be the old home days that had a long, long history, over 100 years here in town. Kind of died on the vine a little bit, got revived by some great volunteers, and then we're trying to get it going again with a little bit more momentum and hopefully a lot of interest. Around the wall, some of you have already had a chance to see if you came in earlier. Along the windowside, there's a bunch of photos and just old, interesting things to take a look at, as well as the photo boards that are up by the juice table up there. Feel free to get some juice if you're a little thirsty. And then there's a bunch of photo albums too, if you had a chance to look through any of those. Okay. So what we wanted to do today, we started off usually the old home days and now celebrate Southampton, starting off with what we call Memory Hour. And that's really the occasion to hear a little bit about our history in Southampton. And as you know, Southampton's had a very long history in terms of agriculture. And so that's kind of the theme of this year's event. And we wanted to have one of our resident historians, I would say, give us a little bit of background and some memories and some stories about growing up here in Southampton and things that he might like to share with us. So we are very honored today to have Mr. Ted Hendrick with us. And Mr. Hendrick is a longtime resident, born here in Southampton, I believe in 1923, if I'm not mistaken. Grew up here in Southampton all his life. Grew up mostly on Clark Street and High Street. Went off to World War II and served 3 years in the Army Air Corps. And returned to Southampton and has lived here ever since. Was a plumbing and heating contractor for most of his life. And then he and his wife Maxine at the time put together this lovely book of wonderful old photos and history of Southampton. So if you haven't ever seen this, you really ought to have this in your library. And they are for sale. I believe they're 15 or 12, sorry? 15? $15. So they exist if you would like to look at them. There's some great history in here and things that you probably will never have understood about Southampton. So with that in mind, Mr. Hendrick said he didn't like long introductions, so we're going to let him come up, and we're going to try it without the microphone, but we'll have the microphone handy if we need it, okay? Good. So, Mr. Hendrick, anytime that you would like to come, please join us.
You all heard that bell years ago. It means there's a happy cow around here somewhere. A happy cow and all is well with the world. Then was then and now is now. So, yeah, that's fine. I know. You'll be sorry you got me. This is about memories. My first memory about old home days was going to a picnic on the green right here. There's two people I remember there. It was me and Calvin Coolidge. Anyway, Calvin was at the head table, and I'm sure I was away at the foot table. We're in one of these photographs somewhere. Well, there's a lot of grumbling afterwards, because Calvin never said anything. Well, so what? I never said anything either. Anyway, 9 years later, I come in one day, and there's this lady sitting at my kitchen table. She just got elected to the select board. So anyway, I had a feeling it wasn't a social call. Select man, she came, she knew I voted for her. She came back for a favor. That's why I'm stuck here today. To me, she was Elvin Fowles' daughter. This is way back. She goes way back too. But anyway, Elvin Fowles, the farmer on Plumway Meadow Road, she raised Asher cattle. And this about 1931 or 2, the Depression just got going. And he started a retail milk business. As the Depression just started going retail, any business was questionable. People would go out of business, people would get more work. But here's Owen, he started this route. He'd come to our house with a big bucket of milk. He had a little tin milk pails, he'd pour us in water, pints, whatever it was. Getting this way, he was charged somewhere between 4 and 6 cents a quart. If you can imagine that. But anyway, he stuck with it. We thrived on his milk, but he progressed to 7 cents a quart. Almost. He continued on, got bigger and better, and he finally bought John Madsen's farm on Gun Road, which is now what's known as the Fletcher Farm. And you look at what a prosperous farm that is. It's there because of Elvin Fowles made money on 7 cents a quart. That's chapter 1. There were 2 farms in town. We're supposed to talk about early farms, right? Yeah. The 2 farms right in the center of town that I found interesting. One of the Dr. Woodbridge house, right down here on East Street. That was built by Dr. Woodbridge in 1749. He guarded them through. Other doctors in 1901, it was purchased by Newton Strong. It had 50 acres. Newton Strong was a dairy farmer. That big house with a great big barn behind it, and 50 acres of land behind it, went all the way up the College Highway. horse farm or something on top of a hill now. They moved the back road, hay, and whatever else. In the basement is where he kept the cows. In the basement, there was an alleyway that went right to the college highway. It came out right opposite the fire station. So the cows were driven out to the college highway, down the college highway. See, the problem was Newton Strong's pasture was way up on the face of a little mountain, which is now the Conner Conservation Area. Generosity of the Bouchard family. So anyway, some kid had a job of driving cows up the pasture every day. This is just in the summertime. They drive to the college highway, down the college highway, and you go right on Ewing's Hill. Ewing's Hill went right by the jug house. Behind the jug house is an ice house. Next up the hill, tobacco. The tobacco barn was there. And the blacksmith shop was there. Then up the hill where Billy Gray lives now. Across the map was the Sheldon Academy. I should talk about that, because I'm the graduate of Sheldon Academy. And that. It was an 8-year course, and we stuck with it. Going somewhere. It wasn't easy, but I made it. But anyway, you all know where Ewing's Hill is? Yes, some people do. There was a committee at one time, you know, the town hall, Ewing's Hill wasn't good enough for name of a road in Southampton. So this committee, you know how they work. Maple Street, now there's a nice original name. Maple Street's by the jug house you see in the picture. Ewing's Hill no longer. Anyway, they drive the cows all the way up to High Street, left on the High Street by Julia Crowell's house. I thought was recently the Sealy place. And then there's the Don's house. And there's this alleyway between it up to this 10-acre pasture. Also some kid would drive up. Just a little stick, the cows seem to know where to go. And back down, never mind. You can imagine driving cows up the college highway today. This is 1929. The other farm right in the middle of town was Wilford Parsons. Just down by the museum. Next, Don Warren still owns the buildings that are still intact. The big old gamble house and the big barn. The cows were there, the barn underneath. And that was a well-known farm, because with that farm, all the acres behind it is still open space. There's several hundred feet on High Street. No new houses there. The Woodbridge house, with its 50 acres, has 5 great big houses up in that block. I don't want to go into that. Now, Woodbridge Parsons, his problem is pasture was on the Manhattan River. You won't know where the Manhattan River is, always from this farm. And we have some farmland where I could out on the College Highway, down the College Highway, several hundred feet to the crossroad. Park Street went to the right, Blue Road went to the left. Looked like the cows down Blue Road, which was Corner Park, all the way to East Street, down East Street, past the big brick house that's just been restored. The great old railroad station, I remember. Right across the tracks is the byway to the pasture. That's conservation area, Manhattan Meadows, I guess it is. And that pasture was all the way down the street, around Louis Melance's house, across the river, the Strong Road, up Strong Road, and straight back to railroad tracks, which was the boundary. So every day during summer, cows were driven down there, back to the barn. All I got to say about it was one time later years, at the Woodbridge house, Clyde Conrad was on at the time. He had a hired hand that lived in the old part of that house, which is torn down recent years. Cowboy Collins was his hired hand. Don't think anybody remember him. Where he came from, where he went, I don't know his history. But one day, a friend of mine, I had been wandering down by the railroad tracks coming through. There's a nice meadowland which is still there at the end of Elm Street. And there's Cowboy Collins with a team of horses raking hay or something. I don't know how it happened. And we stopped and got our skids to ride on his horses. Gee whiz. He was my first horseback ride. That's a great big farm. That's a simple thing you never really did. I think my time is up. Look at this, I got through with Cowboy Collins. I came back to my stanchion and suddenly.
I have one more presentation. Being that he is a young 96, you are now a member of the Senior Center. Yeah, you're honorary member once you turn 90. You lost 6 years, you could have been free. You're welcome. Thank you.
Good, well, thank you very much. We were hoping we'd have a little bit of history here to find out what was going on back in the day, so we thank you very much for giving us those tidbits of your memories from back in the 1920s and earlier. I think we'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions for Mr. Hendrick, or others of you who've been around town. I see some familiar faces that might have some memories too that they would like to share. We can certainly do that, and if we have questions, I can relay them via the mic, or if everybody hears me, I'll forego the mic, which is fine. So, does anybody have anything that they'd like to share? Yes, yeah, sure you would.
Just got here, so.
Yeah.
I always have to tell this story, and some of you will have heard it before, but my mother was born in 1906, and they lived on Searles Farm for a while because my grandfather was a hired hand there, and then they bought what I call the little house in the gully. If anybody lives there, I'm sorry, but I always call it that because you go into the gully and right there on the left-hand side is a little brown house on College Highway, right here.
Oh,
Okay, it's right down here. And so when people ask me, you know, where she lived, that's where she lived. And it's in fine shape now, it looks lovely. When they had it, it was white, but now it's brown and it's got big, yellow fence around it, so you'll know when you see it, that's where it was. And anyway, that just tells you where I'm talking about. My mother was hired to drive cows, and I think they were Parsons cows, which is an old name, and there were lots of Parsonses here. She was hired to drive cows from their pasture, which was down that way somewhere, probably where Atherton's was on Palmer Meadow. But she was about 7. She drove the cows from there to the top of the mountain, up where the big house is on top of the hill, up there. There's pastures up there. And my Aunt Dorothy's family, she was a Parsons, and they owned those areas. So my mother drove the cows up there every day for a nickel a week. Okay, and we always laughed about that because she would, my granddaughter's 5, well, one of them's 7 years old. I wouldn't let her drive a cow or anything else. So, but anyway, she had that responsible job to drive those cows up there. And I've always thought that was amazing. She also rode the train to Easthampton to go to high school. Okay, so that was walk from the house in the gully down to East Street to the tracks, catch the train, go to Easthampton, and then walk up to where Park School is now, okay? So they didn't think anything about walking.
What years was the train here?
It still ran when we came to town, that was 47.
Okay.
It didn't, it was freight then,
Yeah.
okay, but
Yeah.
And
it
I
still
think it
ran
stayed
then.
freight until something like 75,
Yeah.
because it went by my house.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would know.
Now just imagining though, having a train come through Southampton and take the train to school in Easthampton.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just amazing to think about. Yeah. Joe?
I'd like to invite Charlie Knippy up. He's in his tractor gear for the parade.
Ah, there we
So
go.
we have to show him, and his family's had a farm in town since the 1930s.
Here before the
Show the back of it for the audience here.
All right.
Say every word.
Hey, Joe.
Want me up there?
Oh, yeah. Say, if you want to have a memory to share, go for it.
All right. My family moved into Southampton back in the early 1930s. Prior to that, they had a farm at what is now Westover Air Force Base. Westover Air Force Base, they decided to take and construct it, so they were displaced. They moved to Southampton, they moved to Valley Road. They moved to Valley Road because they figured that they were away from everyone, they could do their farming activities and not have to worry about, I wouldn't say neighbors, but people intruding to take and try to rob crops and stuff of that nature, because back then there was a lot of that activity. So they bought basically an abandoned farm on Valley Road, reconditioned it over the years. And my grandparents started with vegetable farming, and they used to take and bring the produce to the city of Hoyoke, and they used to sell the produce there. As farms generate, they evolve. It was mostly just vegetables, some orchards, and basically some cows that were running loose with horses. That evolved into being a pig farm. Back then, it was very lucrative to take and raise pigs. And so they had the garbage contract for the city of Hoyoke, and they used to have about 300 plus pigs. Now think about this today. If you had 300 pigs on a farm in Southampton, everybody in this town would be overjoyed, right? Fresh pork, bacon everywhere, right? Yeah. So anyways, back then, they used to pick up the garbage twice a week in the city. They used to have cans at the different apartment buildings. They pick them up, throw them in 55-gallon drums, truck them back, and feed the pigs. During World War II, because there was basically rationing of meat and stuff like that, the government would buy the pork from them, and that would be shipped out as it went. After World War II, this entity called Public Health showed up, and they said there was a lot of things called trichinosis. So they now required all the, basically garbage was boiled and cooked prior to feeding it to the animals. Well, that took the lucrative out of the farming operation. The cost of trying to take and cook all this stuff to feed the pigs just wiped out the bottom line. So they moved into dairy. That's where I was born and came into play. And we were a large dairy farm. We had about 65 milkers, and we just ran a dairy farm there for years. The tractor I'm riding in the parade is actually a 1965 tractor that my father bought when I was 14 years old. That was my first vehicle that I learned how to drive. Now, we did dairy until about the late 1980s. Late 1980s, it was obvious that you couldn't make a living farming anymore. So because my family wasn't in debt with their operations, we basically sold off the herd, and then I went into working in the private sector, which ended up being the public sector. My father was retired, and what we did is we needed to take and try to preserve the farm. So back then, there was this, what they called agricultural preservation restriction program. So we wanted to preserve the farm, keep it as a farm, so we basically transferred 130 acres into this protected land. We were one of the first farms to protect the land in this community. From that, I ended up going into public health, and the farm transferred into being a boarding facility for horses. And that's what we do now. We board horses, cut and do hay operations like that. We also have an agreement with a wholesale bee operator who brings in about 700 beehives and uses our area as a staging area to distribute them out through the region. In fact, those bees have just left for Georgia. We also take and do classes with the University of Massachusetts and the New England program to train new engineers and health departments in soil conditions so they understand how to take and place septic systems in that area. And we're also partnered up with Homeland Security and the MSPCA, and we train fire departments on responding to large animal rescue situations, like Southampton, which has a horse that runs up the second floor of a building. You know? Note that I didn't expect it was going to be in Southampton, but there it is. So the farm has evolved, being everything from fruits to vegetables, to being a piggery, to being a dairy operation, to now being a horse building operation. And I suspect as the generations go by, you're going to see that change again, because the land's all preserved as agricultural land. And my son is now vested in this, and we're moving forward in that direction. He's the fourth generation. Through all this, I've watched the town of Southampton evolve, and I've always been a participant in the town of Southampton. And I think you guys have a great community. You really do. You have a lot of linkage here, a lot of things going good for you, and you don't have the things I see because I used to work for public health in the inner cities and all the rest of that. So just keep it up. Go.
Thank you, Charlie.
After 66 years, John, you are now a member of the senior center.
You know how long I've been avoiding this place?
Everybody avoids it.
I heard about that.
I didn't realize we were doing business with John. Any questions for Mr. Hendrick or any other thoughts?
I would like to hear a little more about Sheldon, is it Sheldon Academy?
Yeah.
Because I can't quite picture where that is, where it was.
We're sitting.
This is it right here, this place?
Yeah.
Oh, this was called Sheldon Academy.
No.
If you look at one of the pictures, there's a good picture of it over here.
Oh, okay.
This is how it sits by the church and the store.
And where was the store? The store was across the street?
No, it's the house, right in the college highway. Well, it's just all that fixed
Oh,
up.
okay, that's what I mean, right across the street on the corner there, right? Louis was there, right? Okay, that helps me. I'm a newbie, I haven't been here all that long, so, okay.
Once it again lost.
So Sheldon Academy was grade 1 through 8
Yeah.
Yes.
when you were here?
Grade 1 through 8 at Sheldon.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
8 long years.
Yes. 8 long years.
How many students in a class? How many students in a class when you went to school? Quite a few, like more than 20? 20? About an average of today's.
Yeah, just consolidated all the elementary schools all together.
They do a lot of consolidating in the Hampshire. That's the way it works. We look at Hampshire Regional, etc.
How about Barry? You got something you'd like to
Well, I was
share?
just gonna say, getting back to the cattle drives, my dad used to tell me about when every summer they'd run their herd up to the pasture in Chester from our farm on Russellville Road. And he was about 15 years old. They would do it on horseback, so he felt like a real cowboy. And they would go up through Huntington, up Romney Road to get up to Chester Hill. A long trip by foot. And if you're familiar with where Montgomery is, the town of Montgomery Town Hall, there's a flat after that, and there's swamp on both sides. And apparently, the story used to say was John Madsen was part of that drive, and some of his cows got out and stuck in the swamp out there. And he had a heck of a time getting those cows back, and the air was pretty blue. And, they always called that John Madsen Swamp after
Really, I didn't know that.
him.
Very good.
How many miles was that here?
What's that?
How many miles did?
Oh, God, probably 20 anyway.
Yeah.
And how often did they do that?
Every spring.
Yeah.
They leave them up
Part
there?
of the herd,
Okay, they just leave them up there for the,
for the grade.
They'd stay up in the summer and then come on back down. Yeah. Yeah, just to add to that, my grandfather did the same thing, and my grandfather lived in what is now the Merritt House, right at the corner of Wolcott and Pomeroy. Used to be the Lee and Fowles house, and so that was my granddad. And that's where the Ashers and the 5-cent milk started. And he too had a pasture in Huntington, up on Kimball Road up there. And it's, 30 acres, and he would do the same thing, walk those cows up over the mountain, and they spent the summer up there.
Yep.
And so it's the way it was back in the day. So yeah. That's why I had Candy. Yeah.
Candy, Gunn, I'm Nikki. Our farm started in 1884. My great-grandfather came down from Sunderland because he realized he was not inheriting that farm. There is quite a few guns in Sunderland and Montague. We helped found that town. He came down here. And it amazes me, in the 1880s, agriculture in this country, you could make money. Because he made his money basically peddling milk and eggs to Holyoke and Springfield. And it is amazing because he has the monument in the cemetery, a big monument. We're like, whoa, that was money. But he was able to make money. My grandfather, we kind of said, just kind of held the farm. And then in 1948, there was a fire and it burned down. It was the old setup of house, shed, barn, and it burnt. Everyone got out alive thanks to a stray dog that had come that my mother had befriended, and that dog barked and woke them up. And that's how they all got out alive. And a couple of years later, all of a sudden, that dog just disappeared and what was not found. But at that point, when they rebuilt, everything went in my parents' name, and they had done chickens, but they settled just on dairy animals. And that's why if you look at the house, it's like house here, shed there, hay barn out there, barn there, Quonset there. We spread everything out because that wasn't happening again. We kept it as a dairy farm. My parents had won an award, a state award in 1953, which is for best improvement in agriculture and farm quality. And if you figure that was amazing in doing it for 5 years, from building up from absolutely nothing, a $5 bill. Then in 1991, my dad had a stroke, and my brother and I took over the farm. And for the next 25 years, we raised Angus. And my parents, because my brother was into education and I was into education and then banking, they put our farm in 61A because they said, we want you to have the freedom. If you choose to farm, fine. If you don't, farm. But we kept it in 61A, and then last year it ended because I could not make the hay alone. But we did, our equipment went to Charlie Touchette, so that he's still using our farming equipment. But it was just the evolution, and Charlie's right. I mean, you hit times where it was hard. I remember my last year, my mother was a bookkeeper, and she's like, Dad's farming because he likes it, because we aren't making any money. It was his hobby, in essence, and we're dealing with 60 plus Holsteins.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thoughts? I'll add one thing said, my dad bought the farm from his uncle, John Madsen, and we then started a dairy farm. So basically, he left the Ashers after a while, a few years, and went into Guernseys. And so the Guernseys, you see an exhibit over at Clement Park. But the Golden Guernseys are known for their great milk, very rich in butterfat, which at the time was extremely important, and that was the moneymaker for us, because every extra point you could get for butterfat, you got more money from the creamery. So the Golden Guernseys were always the favorite on the farm, and we had probably about 100 head over a 50-year period. So the farm was there from 1938 to 1988 in my parents' name. And all of us kids were involved through 4-H and showing around to all the fairs every summer long. And so there's lots of awards, I guess, that the Fowles family has had from exhibiting their cattle and being sort of the pride of Southampton at one point in time. But one of the things that happened in the early 40s, again, before I came along, was the growing of tobacco in town. It was pretty prevalent during the early war years. And so my folks were raising, I guess what they call Havana tobacco. It was basically the wrapper tobacco for cigars or whatever. So it was only the wrapper tobacco. And, oh, well, there we go. There we go. We need Christina up here too. These are both of our great uncles here involved. Thank you. Anyway, so at the time, it was probably about 3 or 4 years that they were raising tobacco down now where Fletcher's have their plant stand area. That whole area between that and the next house down was all tobacco. And it was a real tough job. And I know at one point in time, you know, my mother used to tell stories about having to go and kick all the tobacco worms off the tobacco, which are just nasty things. But you had to be very careful with the tobacco. You had to pick it just right, the right time. You had to get it, you know, put it up to dry at the right time. You had to take the leaves off, strip the leaves, get the leaves all speared just correctly. You couldn't have any imperfections in this tobacco when it was sold. It was really, really quite a job. And at one point in time, my dad actually fell from the rafters because they had to hang the tobacco on the laths. And he actually fell. It had been kind of an icy time, and there was still a little bit of just wetness, I guess, on the rafters. And so he fell from the rafters and broke his leg, which was not very helpful to continue to do that as well as continue milking cows. And actually 2 people in town joined in to help with the tobacco. Mickey Melanson, who was my 2nd grade teacher, and Gert Hutchinson. The 2 of them came over and ended up being workers on our farm to help get the tobacco crop in. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made it. And so finally, until probably about 1945, they did the tobacco. And then when the war years ended, then the tobacco kind of went away as well, and they continued just with the dairy. But just to say, there's been a lot of variety in the town over time. And certainly now you can't but diversify. That's all you can do. You couldn't make it on just dairy alone these days. And I think you see that with what's happening now with almost every farmer's got some 2nd or 3rd crop or means of income. So that's really the reality of today. But it's really nice to see that agriculture is still part of Southampton. There's a lot of green space still out there, and like Charlie, we were one of the very first farms, probably in about 1981, to also put our land in the ag preservation restriction, which is why there's another 120 acres there between that and the Merritt's farm, the Merritt's area of my farm, my grandpa's farm on Hilltop. So both of those areas are ag preservation. So I think those are the kinds of things where people were thinking about conservation, and we still are today, trying to keep whatever green space we have in Southampton open and available for those who would like to enjoy it. So,
I want to add just one little story that Parsons farm down there that was passed down to my grandmother Dorothy and her new husband Willard Howland. But Dorothy's sister Anna married a man whose last name was Howlett, Carrie Howlett, and he was from town. But they wanted even more land, and in 1947 they moved up to Vermont on Lake Champlain. And I'm saying this because his family still has a very large dairy farm. And when you get the salted butter from Cabot in the package, that is their barn. In the package.
Very good. Great. Yes, please.
When the agricultural land goes into that program, what's the benefit? I know it's for the agriculture. Is there a benefit to the farmers? I mean, is it just stagnant? They don't get any money for it? Or?
At the time, I think the program has probably changed a bit now, but at the time, the ag preservation restriction, which is a state program,
Yeah.
yeah, we were paid to put a certain number of acres in permanent conservation, so it can never be taken out unless somebody goes and makes a case before the state legislature to get it taken out.
Oh.
So, but at the time, we were, and this was in probably 80, 81, somewhere in there, so there was just the beginnings of the program, and I honestly don't remember the amount per acre, but it was quite minimal. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't building lot value, it was agricultural value. And I think that probably still exists. I don't know if anybody has the figures on that.
They do an appraisal, and
Yeah.
it's all there.
Yeah, right, there's an
Very
appraisal.
They do a value
Yeah.
of the land at its highest, best use
Yeah.
as real estate, and then a value of it as farm.
Okay.
And then that difference is what they.
Yeah, that's what I figure out. So, but that's evolved over time too. I think there was a less scientific formula early on when they first started the program.
And it could be sold, but it would always be farmland.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, it can pass on to somebody, yeah, but it has to remain as farmland of some sort. Exactly. And that's really the real, you know, real preservation of it. The chapter lands are great, but that's intermediate tax relief, but they are not the permanent preservation like the ag preservation that we are programming. Good. Any other thoughts, comments? Anybody living in an old house in town that they'd like to say? Yeah, you got to easily.
So I am living in an old house. So, and I mentioned that farm, the Parsons, went to my father and he grew up there. And he met my mother who grew up an entire mile away. And their house was the Lockville Hotel. And that was called such because it was on the canal. And I've been recently studying that both the canal and the house were started to be built in 1827. So I think it was the canal workers who stayed in the hotel because the canal didn't start working until 35. And so it was an 8-year period. And then, so my ancestors bought the house in 1840. They were the Bartletts. And the next generation down was Herbert and Clarence, and they actually their parents grew up in Chester. I was just thinking about these cows that were going up there. And so anyway, Herbert started lime and sheet metal, and that was my great-grandfather. And so my kids are the 7th generation in our house.
Wow. A lot of history. Anybody else?
Okay, I have a story.
Yes.
It's kind of farming. I don't know if anybody remembers the Closures on Palmer Meadow Road. They used use the tobacco barns, and they made it into horse barns afterwards. And as a kid, me and my cousin Eddie Bishop, it was our job during the summer, the racehorses would actually break out of the barn and start going down the street. And for some reason, they decided to leave a 7- and 8-year-old in charge of trying to get the racehorses back in the barn. And we would actually have to run ahead of the horses on the side, go up the street, get in front of them, and walk them back to the barn. And I look back now at how small 7- and 8-year-olds are compared to these giant racehorses that used to race at 3 County Fair. And I'm going, were those people idiots leaving us in charge of racehorses?
But you live to tell the story, that's it. Very good. Good. Well, thank you. I don't think we've got too much else to say. Stick around for a few minutes and look through the albums and have a little bit of juice and so forth. We probably won't get going with the parade till closer to 11:30, so we've got about a half an hour. Or if you want to head over to the park early, you can, or go home and get your lunch and come back, or whatever you want to do. But we'll hopefully have the little tractor parade starting down towards the fire station and just going down East Street to the park. So, and hopefully we'll have some scouts around to ride in the wagon. Anybody that would like to ride in the wagon? Your old wagon. Open invitation. So thank you very much, and thank you. We really appreciate seeing you here, and it's just wonderful to share memories from people that have really lived through so many different iterations of what this town has done in its history. So thank you again for coming.